I'm very pleased that you've all stayed. Thank you very much for doing that. Because afternoon topic is about the ET human hybrids. And it's a very big program of hybridization that's going on that probably most of us have not been aware of. And I've been aware of it because of being so involved in this extraterrestrial work. And so after years of doing regressions for people who've had extraterrestrial encounters, and there's so much more I could say about all that too, but we don't have the time for that today. But after years of doing that work, or during those years of doing that work, I was aware that there are reproductive programs going on the part of some of the extraterrestrial beings. Not all of them, but some of them. That is, they want to create hybrids who are part their species, their extraterrestrial species, and part human. A lot of these species regard human beings as being quite unique amongst all the different kinds of beings that there are in the universe. And one of the things that they like about human beings is that we have stronger bodies than many of them do, and we have a fair amount of intelligence, and we have a lot of creativity, more artistic creativity of many different types than many of them have. Many of the extraterrestrial species are very highly intelligent, and particularly technologically intelligent, psychically intelligent, and so forth, but not necessarily artistically talented or interested. And they see that we are. You know, we have so much music and dance and arts and ceramics and all kinds of art forms. And they marvel at that because their lives tend to be much sort of plainer and simpler, maybe very efficient and so forth, but not artistically decorative. And mainly, they see that we humans have a huge range of emotions, and that our emotions can be very volatile, they can be very changeable, they can be very exaggerated, very pronounced, very strong at times, and very gentle and quiet at other times. So they look at us as kind of unique life forms in the cosmos. So many of these beings also have been breeding amongst themselves, their own species, in other words, for so many eons of time that they have become weakened. And for various reasons, they have lost their ability to reproduce. And they say that there are a number of reasons for this. One is that some of these species have cloned their own kind over and over for many, many generations because it's just easier, it's more reliable. They know what they're getting, in a sense, more than we do. You know, when we're pregnant and carry a baby, we can tell a certain amount now because of ultrasound and so forth, but you know, we really don't know too much about, we don't know anything about the character of this baby. We can know the gender now, but we don't know the characteristics that that new life form is going to have. Anyway, a lot of them have, for simplicity reasons and sort of predictability, they have cloned as a method of reproducing. A lot of the species, too, they're in danger of becoming extinct because they have sort of ruined themselves by radiation. That's one of the reasons. They've done so much long-distance travel through the universe. See, a lot of these species are way, way older than we human beings are. And so they've done, many centuries or hundreds or thousands of years of interspace travel, and they picked up a lot of radiation, and that is causing a lowering of their reproductive rate, too, and a dying out of some of their species. There are other reasons, too, that they have given for needing to do a reproductive program. And to do a reproductive program, they've chosen humans, because of some of our interesting characteristics, to do the reproducing with, to create hybrid children, hybrid babies, children who grew up to be hybrid adults. And usually, those hybrids are living on these spaceships, the UFOs, with the species who do that hybridization with humans. Or sometimes the hybrids will live on the other planet that those beings came from. They don't live here, in other words. So there are two kinds of classifications of hybrids. One is the type that is not human enough in proportion to be able to live here. They wouldn't be able to be accepted here because they look peculiar enough that they just would not find life very receptive here. And also they would not be able to withstand our bacteria and our viruses. So they can't live here for that reason. And maybe their digestive system is different enough too, is more extraterrestrial-like than human, and they wouldn't be able to handle our food. So they don't live here. Then there's another type I will be talking about that does live here. But first of all, we're going to talk about the types that live on the ships or other planets. So they do live elsewhere. That is one of the important things about them. And then there are different stages of those hybrids too. First of all, they'll begin with a mixture of one extraterrestrial with one human and create a hybrid that way. And then the next stage is that they'll take that hybrid and combine with another human. So that hybrid is 2/3 human and 1/3 hybrid. And then they'll take another generation and combine that hybrid with still another human, so that offspring is more human. And then when they get to the latest stage, breeding with another human, that one has quite a bit of extraterrestrial, but certainly looks, acts, digests, and so forth, more like a human, and that kind of hybrid could survive, could live here all right on Earth. And I think that we do have some of those coming along, but as far as I know, most of the ET human hybrids are living elsewhere, on the ships or on the planets. Now you may wonder who or how they do that process of hybridization. Well, a typical thing is that they will abduct a human woman for an hour or two, and they will remove eggs from her ovaries, keep the eggs there, and then combine that with their extraterrestrial DNA and reproductive material. They probably combine it in a little petri dish, that's how I imagine it, create an embryo, in other words, half human, half extraterrestrial. Then there'll be another occasion when they take that same woman and plant that embryo with her eggs in it into her uterus, and then she will become pregnant and carry that baby for, maybe 2 months, maybe almost up to 3 months. And then they will take her again and remove that little embryo from her uterus. And during that first couple of months when she is pregnant, she feels pregnant, has all the signals, I should say, of pregnancy. And she will go to a doctor, and the doctor will examine her, and the doctor says, yes, you are pregnant. Now, maybe she's married, and so it's not really that much of a surprise that she's pregnant. Maybe she's not married. Maybe she hasn't been with a man ever or for a long time. Maybe she's a middle teenager or a young teenager and think, gosh, I haven't been with anybody. How could I be pregnant? But there she is. She's pregnant. And so it's a great mystery. And there are people who experience this sometimes. And then suddenly one day, that female human will wake up and think, gee, I just don't feel the same anymore. She had, that night before, been taken, and that whole embryo had been removed. And she's no longer pregnant. And so if she goes to a doctor again, the doctor will say, gee, you were pregnant, we have that on record, yes, 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 but you're not now. So when did you have an abortion? And the woman will say, I didn't have any abortion. Or when did you have a miscarriage? I didn't have a miscarriage. I would have noticed, certainly would have felt that. And he says, well, you're not pregnant now. The doctors don't know what to do with this. You know, what would you say if you were a doctor and you had run into this? So very often they'll say, well, sometimes the little embryo will pull free from the lining of the uterus and will get reabsorbed into the rest of the woman's system. So that's a reason that they come up with. I don't know if that can happen or not for real. Anyway, the woman isn't pregnant any longer. In the meantime, that little embryo has been taken by the extraterrestrials and put into a gestation tank. You might remember having quickly seen a series of glass tanks on the ship in one of those drawings this morning. They'll have like a glass tank with special fluid in it, and the tank is attached to some sort of mechanism to, control the temperature and the chemical constituency of the liquid and so forth. And the little embryo will develop into a fetus and be gestated there until advanced enough to be quote unquote born. In other words, taken out of the tank and wrapped up in swaddling clothes and then put in like a bassinet. So people, experiencers, have sometimes, the mothers, have been taken to see the babies in the tanks, and then sometimes they're taken on another occasion when the baby has been taken out of the tank and wrapped up in like little blanket type clothes and put in a bassinet. And sometimes they'll see a whole wall, a long wall or rounded wall on the craft with, like row after row after row of these little alcoves in which are these hybrid babies that have been mature enough to be taken out of the tank. And they're being raised in the air, in that case. and they're fed and they're held by the extraterrestrials. And so a human mother of one of these babies is often taken and asked to hold the newborn baby, the baby who is her baby, from her eggs and having gestated for a couple of months in her body. And different women react in various ways to that. Some say, oh, yes, of course, and if it's my baby, I'll love this baby, and they'll hold and nurture the baby. And some are just sort of, horrified and, oh, I don't even want to touch that baby. It looks too different, looks too freaky. But they're encouraged to please this baby, because it's part human, it needs to have its mother's nurturing. They had learned that from trial and error, that those babies didn't live if they didn't have the human mother's nurturing. So the women usually step up to the plate and do some cuddling and nurturing and talking to. Some take to it very naturally and wonderfully. Some have to kind of warm up to it, but they do. And then that same woman will be taken on various occasions during the next number of years, could be 20 years even, to see that child again as the child is growing up. And some mothers develop a whole relationship with that child and learn to really care for and love the child. Some mothers even want to bring the child back to raise the child on Earth, but they're told, no, the child isn't human enough to be able to survive well on Earth, so you can come and visit the child here on the spaceship, but that child cannot live on Earth. So I did show you some pictures this morning of hybrids who look like they were teenagers or even young adults, and those were pictures drawn by the mothers who spent some time on the ship with those hybrid children and remembered in great detail what they looked like, and were able to depict that in pictures. So anyway, that's how that is for women. Now men, too, boys, when they are mature enough, like in their age 12, 13 or so, in their puberty on up, they are sometimes taken and sperm is removed from them, and they too can have hybrid children. So it's a slightly different procedure because they're males rather than females, of course, but they too are taken to see the baby in the tank being gestated, and or sometimes taken later when the baby is born and is on the ship. They're taken to see the baby and see the child, but usually I hear about this more from women than from men. There's also reproduction of this type of hybrid happening by direct mating together between an extraterrestrial and a human in an abduction. And sometimes people will have that happen quite a number of times before they even know consciously that that sort of thing has happened. And sometimes they don't even find out about that until they have a regression to one of their ET experiences. And that's where they learn that that sort of thing has happened. And sometimes people get kind of fooled, tricked into it. For instance, a man I worked with quite a number of times in regression, he was taken on one occasion, and he was made to lay down on a table, like a medical table, and into that room on the ship came the most gorgeous, exotic female he had ever seen. And even though he was a married man and, was true and faithful to his wife, this female who came into the room on the ship was just off the charts appealing. And she started to have intercourse with him. And he felt a little conflict because he was this married man. But anyway, here it was, this was going on. And halfway through the act, her, what we call a screen image, that look she had of a gorgeous female, human, that sort of faded, and what she really was showed, which was a female reptilian being. So he was not pleased. In fact, he was really traumatized by that. Now, he didn't remember that consciously, but after that experience, which, as I said, had been traumatizing, he was not able to make love with his wife anymore. They had had a perfectly good relationship up to that point, and she really wondered, what happened? Why did he change? And that went on for a few years, and then I worked with him, and one of the regressions we did showed that event had happened. And then, because I'm a therapist also, as well as a regression therapist, I did a little therapy work with him on that. Didn't even have to do very much. And then he got through the trauma and was able to be perfectly normal, functioning with his wife again, which was nice for both of them, of course. But that sort of thing can happen. And I've had it happen with women, too, that there was another woman, very often would be, when she'd on the craft, she would have sexual relationships with one particular being. It was always that particular male being each time. And he was a very, very attractive, human-looking being. But on one occasion, she sensed that maybe he wasn't really human after all. And so she reached up. She was on the table waiting for this encounter to happen. And she just reached up and she grabbed at his face, and it turned out to be sort of a mask, and pulled it off, and he was a reptilian being. And so, wow, she was really surprised. But she had kind of gotten to like this being over time, a good thing. And anyway, then the man said, this reptilian male said, "Yes, I am your husband, and we have a child." So he gestured toward the doorway of that room on the spaceship, and in came a little boy, she judged about 4 years old. And he said, "This is our son." He was a reptilian human hybrid, partly him and partly her. And this little boy, he was very sturdy, had very different texture of skin, different coloring of skin, different eyes, round and yellow eyes. But she hopped off the table, knelt down, embraced this little boy, and said, "I am so proud of him." So here he was, a reptilian human hybrid, but she had great love for him. And he was very sturdy, very strong, very compact, muscly, even as a 4-year-old. And that's why she just was very proud of him and really was able to love him. So anyway, those are just a couple of examples, but there is that hybrid program. And so we might wonder why do they create this? Well, the main reason given by a variety of species, according to my regressions, has been that their species is in danger of dying out for various reasons, and that they want to combine with humans because humans are stronger physically in some cases, not in terms of the reptilians, but of the other beings which are more spindly, like the little gray beings, for instance, and some of the very, very tall, thin beings. We have more substance, more muscularity, more strength in that way. And then, of course, we have the emotions and the creativity, as I mentioned before. So anyway, there are quite a number of species. I don't know how many, but quite a number that I have become aware of that are having these hybrid children. So we might wonder why they do that other than preserving their own species. And various reasons have been given, such as that they want to create some ambassadors, some go-betweens between their species and our species, because particularly as humans are going more into space, and we will be meeting with other beings, more consciously awake, meeting with them and dealing with them in various ways, it would be very handy to have some beings who are part human and part extraterrestrial who could understand and feel with both species and be sort of go-betweens and almost like interpreters between the two species. So that's certainly one reason. And then some of the species name characteristics that they wish that they had, like certain kinds of intelligence and creativity and the sense of wonder, the emotions and so forth, and that they would like to have that as part of their species. So even though they become very, very brainy, very intelligent, they realize that compared to us, they lack some characteristics. Even the characteristic of love. They see that because of our emotions, we can have a very strong sense of love and a strong bond of love, more than they can. And they see that that's sort of a blessing and a curse. Sometimes that causes us great pain, that we have love and then lose that love. But we also have great wonder and great beauty and great enrichment because we have that capacity to love and be loved. So as the universe is traveling more and more, than they have been for eons, but as we are more and more, it's becoming more important that we be able to understand each other and relate to each other. That's probably one reason why they teach us, or experiencers of this phenomenon, teach them psychic skills and telepathy and so forth, so that they at least can be some of the humans who can really communicate better with these other beings than most of us who don't experience that sort of thing. So anyway, that is the group of hybrids that I am beginning to talk about. And then we wonder which races of extraterrestrials are doing the hybridization program. Well, the grays, the Zeta Reticuli grays, are one of the main species that seems to be creating hybrids. And the reptilians are doing this. They do it through the egg removal, the spur removal, and also direct intercourse with humans. And then there are the human-like, human-looking races, which we generally tend to call the Nordic beings. Some of them come from the Pleiades, some of them come from other planets too, where there are beings who look quite human-like. And then the insectoid beings, we call them mantis beings because they look like big praying mantises, that we have little ones here on Earth. And the Anunnaki, that's a whole species that apparently came here to Earth very, very ancient times, according to the work of Zecharia Sitchin and some others. And anyway, that's a species that continues out in space, and some of them did long ago combine to form human beings, according to that work, and continue to do some interbreeding with humans now to create hybrids. And beings from a planet called Sirius B, S-I-R-I-U-S, B, beings from Mellotron, and and Arcturus, the blue Arcturian beings, and the tall white Zetas, and the Essassani. And so there are different subtypes, like green skin, gray types that do hybridization, and beings that are just simply called Zetas, not just the Zeta Reticuli, but Zetas. And so I've described that process of hybridizations that they use, and that apparently is done in a lot of humans who are having experiences with extraterrestrials, with or without they're really knowing about it, that they are having that sort of thing happen. It's very interesting that even women who are postmenopausal, so you would think they would have nothing to do with reproducing anymore, but they may have no uterus that may have been surgically removed for one reason or another. But the extraterrestrials can even do this hybridization program with them by putting an artificial uterus into the woman for this purpose of creating the hybrid. So it's sort of a temporary artificial uterus that is put into the woman, and so she'll be able to gestate the little embryo for a couple of months before it's removed. And when it is removed, if they do not wish to use her for this purpose anymore, they will remove that artificial universe. I keep wanting to say uterus. And that is pretty amazing thing. Now, a woman who will experience that process will often feel like somehow suddenly she's more crowded in her lower abdomen and not know why she feels more crowded. And it usually just goes on for a couple of months, so she may or may not go to a doctor and find out that that has actually happened. So those mothers don't have to, of course, carry the baby full term, and they don't have to give birth like the rest of us do. So it's kind of an easy way to have a hybrid child in that particular sense. Also, the reasons for hybridization, some of them have said that they want to create a new superior race with some of their best features, like their very high degree of intelligence, and with some of our characteristics that they lack. Other groups have said that they create hybrids to create a race that is more spiritually conscious, more spiritually advanced, as they consider themselves more spiritually advanced than many, many humans are. So those are reasons as well. And there was this wonderful professor, some of you may know about, Dr. John Mack, a medical doctor who was one of the psychiatrists in the psychiatry department at Harvard University. And he said that after, in the future, distant future, there will be destruction of the earth and humans. This he found out from extraterrestrials. After destruction of the earth and humans, hybrids will be placed in groups in many parts of the earth to live as a new civilization with a whole new system and a system of living and knowledge from that other world that they are half made up of. So there are various researchers who have been aware of this reproductive program going on by a number of different extraterrestrial species. But now I'd like to talk about the ET human hybrids who are living here on Earth. Now, how I got involved in this part, I never had expected any of this. I never grew up expecting to be doing anything about extraterrestrials. In fact, I never even heard of them, really, until about 1988, and certainly had no opinion about it. I had seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and I had seen E.T., and thought, oh, gee, wouldn't that be amazing if anything like that existed? But that's just fiction. I thought anything about UFOs was just fiction. But anyway, eventually I got very involved in it. So from 1991 till about 2008 or 9, I didn't think that there was any such thing as hybrids living here on Earth. I thought they were all on the ships, as I have been talking about. But I went to one of the international UFO congresses, which I had given a few lectures at over the years, and they had a kiosk of sandwiches and things out in the hall one noon, and I had bought a sandwich, and I was reaching for the mayonnaise at a kiosk sort of thing, and to put on my sandwich, and noticed somebody came next to me and was reaching for the same condiments. And of course, I looked to see who was there, and that woman looked at me, and I did a big double take, and she said, "What? Like, why are you looking at me that way?" And I said, "Well, I hope you don't mind my saying it, but you remind me of a hybrid." And she said, with a big smile, "I am a hybrid." That woman was named Cynthia Crawford. Some of you might know of her, some of you might not. A woman in Arizona who's an ET human hybrid, and a wonderful, wonderful woman who I subsequently came to know really quite closely. We were very dear friends. She died about a year and a half ago, unfortunately, of a brain tumor, but what a wonderful woman, doing great, great work here. Anyway, that was my first hybrid, and I thought, wow, I didn't know hybrids could be living here on Earth, but how wonderful. This is a great woman who did a lot of sculptures of extraterrestrial beings. She would channel, she'd kind of go into a meditative state and channel various extraterrestrial types one at a time, and they would be directing her to do the sculptures, which are usually about this big, of their type of being. They wanted humans to know about their existence, about their type of being and their interest in human beings. So she did about at least 20, maybe 22 or so different species of extraterrestrials in these sculptures. over a period of years. And she helped many, many people who sort of felt very close to the extraterrestrials and felt that they were here to do helpful work with fellow humans, to really help enlighten them and to know about the extraterrestrials. And those people she called star seeds. Some of you may have heard that term, star seeds, star seed adults, and also star kids, star children, indigo children, crystal children, and so forth. Children of light who seem to be very close to the extraterrestrials, and some of them even seem to be maybe partly extraterrestrials who are here really to help humanity. It's all very good. There's nothing spooky and nefarious about it. It's all very positive. So that was the first hybrid I met. And then, about 2 years later, at another international UFO Congress, a man I knew who was involved in this sort of work, he brought somebody over to meet me, and I looked at her, the woman he brought over, and immediately thought, she's a mantis being. And so she said, hello, and I said, hello. And I said, well, I hope you don't mind my saying this, but you remind me of a mantis being. And she leaned across the book table where I was at the moment and said, good for you. I am a mantis being. I am from planet Estigan, which I had never heard of before that time. Anyway, she seemed like a wonderful woman. And why I knew the first person was a hybrid, why I knew the second person was a hybrid, I don't know. I just knew, and it happened to be right. I'm so grateful, because then I got to know these wonderful people. And so the second lady and I had lunch together, and eventually she came and spent a week with me, and I kept thinking, wow, yeah, she really is different. I can really get it. She really is part mantis being, this tall insectoid type. A wonderful, wonderful woman who spends her life, she's married, so her husband supports her, fortunately. She goes around to supermarkets and banks and various public places, and when she will see a child with a child's mother who she intuitively knows is a star seed, a star child, she will talk to the child right there in the supermarket aisle or the bank or wherever, and the mother will be right there hearing, and the mother will confirm, yes, that's right, he does see auras. Yes, that's right, he does speak telepathically. Yes, that's right, he is visited by other beings, and so forth. And so she will then get to know that child and the parent and encourage that child to keep developing the psychic abilities and to really care about the earth and the human beings around him, to really be of helpful service here. So that's what her work is, and she will run workshops for these children of all ages, including teenagers, to really help them to get on with the work that they are here to do. So these starseed children are not necessarily hybrids. They don't necessarily have genetics, but when you really look into it, if you have a chance to do regression work or even just talk to them, it turns out that they have had past incarnations as another species of extraterrestrials, or even over a long period of time, maybe a series of different types of extraterrestrial beings, particularly the ones who were very caring about Earth and humanity. And so in this incarnation, they have chosen to not be one of those species, but to live here fully as humans and serve in this very benevolent way. So then after that second hybrid, somebody called one day and said, "Did you know that there's a gathering of hybrids happening out in the Palm Springs area? We would like you to come." And so, yes, of course I'll come. So that was a group with probably about 5 different people who are ET human hybrids living here on Earth. And they were such excellent, wonderful people. I just felt, wow, I'm the luckiest person I know to get to know these people and know, really who or what they are. And they all had wonderful abilities. So right after that time, that was in 2015, I received a phone call from a young man in England named Miguel Mendonça. And Miguel is somebody I had never known of before, but he said he was very, very interested in the extraterrestrial phenomenon and very interested in the hybrids, the ET human hybrids. And he had heard that I was doing a lot of this extraterrestrial work and that I knew something about hybrids. And I said, yes, I've just come back from about 4 days with a group of hybrids. He was just over the moon, as they say in England, with excitement about that. And so we had a few long phone calls, and he was getting more and more into that field of interest, and met a couple of people in England who said they were ET human hybrids. And he was asking me all about the ones I knew. And then he said, why don't we write a book together? Which we started to do and did eventually finish several months later, which is over here on the side, Meet the Hybrids. So by that time we had 9 people whom we were interviewing at great length for the book. We'd get on Skype and have 4-hour interviews with each person, and then another 4 hours sometime later, and then follow-up discussions with them. And from that book, we wrote Meet the Hybrids. Although we included in the book 8 hybrids, one of them we disqualified for other reasons that didn't have to do with her being a hybrid, but there was a question we thought it might be better not to publish her particular case. But anyway, there were 8 of them who we thoroughly felt, and still do, trust as ET human hybrids. So about the hybrids, this type of hybrids, not the ones that I talked about living on the ship. But these hybrids all were born here on Earth from a human mother and a human father. But they were created as hybrids in 7 out of the 8 cases. Well before birth, they were hybridized. So that meant that in some cases, when they were in their mother's womb as a regular fetus, that the mother was taken on board by the extraterrestrials, and the mother was given an injection through the wall of her abdomen, through the wall of the uterus, and into the growing fetus. And so that was how that fetus became hybridized with ET genetics. And in each of these cases, it was a group of about at least 4 and sometimes more extraterrestrials who together, working together, combined their genetics, their reproductive material, into this mixture which was injected into the fetus through the mother's uterus. So that's how they became hybridized. And in one case, one of the men, Robert, whose picture you will see, he said that an embryo was created. The mother was not pregnant with him yet, but an embryo was created with a few different types of extraterrestrial genetics, and the eggs having been taken from the mother and the sperm having previously been taken from the father. So that mixture was already created as an embryo, and that was planted in the mother's uterus on an occasion when she was taken for that. That's how he came into being. And so all of these hybrids were raised full term by the human mother here on Earth, and were born in the regular way that we all get born here on Earth, with one exception. And that woman, Julie, whose picture you will see, she was born the regular way, and she was not hybridized. She was not injected with the ET DNA until she was 6 years old. And from that point on, she became a hybrid. And so all of these people, these hybrid children, born here the regular way, growing up from infancy with the rest of us, they always felt very different than anybody, different than any other children they knew, different from their families. And they would usually say to the parents, "You're not really my parents. My parents are out there somewhere, and I miss them." And the parents were dismayed, insulted, by this. And they'd say, "Of course we're your parents. We were right there. I mean, you were born out of my body." And he'd say, "Well, I don't know, because I just don't feel that you're my real mother, and I miss my real family." And these children had many skills that other children never had, or very few children have. A lot of psychic skills, tremendous intuition, psychic ability. They had the ability to communicate telepathically. They had healing skills. They'd see auras around everybody. And as with so many children, they assumed everybody else had those abilities, but gradually began to realize that nobody else they knew had those abilities. And they also felt it was just difficult to live here because of the density of living here in the third dimension, that life felt more efforted and sluggish. And some of them had different physiological features. They looked perfectly human and acted human most of the time. They learned to conform. But one of them had a whole different blood type that had never been known of before. Another one had a totally different bone constituency. Another one had different muscular constituency and was told from early childhood, "Don't run around and play. Don't participate in sports. Your muscles will not be able to handle it." I mean, that was quite unusual. Another one of the young men from England, he had one of the abdominal organs up here in his chest. So with most of them, there was some kind of physical difference. We would call it an abnormality. Cynthia Crawford had thumbs that rounded out significantly at the end, which turned some of you are looking at your thumbs, turned out to be very convenient for the sculpture work that she did. But anyway, she always had that, and she had different bone consistency as well. So there were some of these differences. Okay, let's get into the pictures of these hybrids. I'll sort of introduce you to 6 of the hybrids. This is one of our hybrids named Jacqueline Smith. She lives in Ohio, and she's pictured here with a dog because one of her wonderful skills among many is that she's a great animal communicator, and she can track lost dogs or lost pets of any kind, and she'll just be out taking a walk and a little squirrel will run along the path, and she'll communicate with the squirrel or the birds or cats or dogs or snakes or any kind of living life. And she, like all of these hybrids, are wonderful healers, do various kinds of physical healing. They're all very talented at that. Jacqueline also does what she calls star origin readings. And she can do this on Skype too, if anybody's interested. She gave me a star origin reading, and I was thrilled. She told my types of incarnations from way back when I was first created as a soul. I don't know how many eons of time that was ago, but the different realms that I had been in and different species. And every time she mentioned a different species, I just felt this big explosion of light going on with me. Oh yes, no wonder I've identified with them. No wonder I've loved the mantis being. No wonder I had to swim with dolphins in this life because I was one of the dolphin-like species for a number of lifetimes. It was really thrilling, and I think she absolutely has that ability to do that. So this is one of the beings that she has had lots of experiences with, a little gray type. It's not the little sort of mechanical robot-like gray beings, but one of the more kind of resilient feeling type little gray beings. And then this being she had depicted in this particular way with a body that looked like that because it was almost a transparent being. You could kind of see through it or through the body of it, but a very wise being. And then this being very knowing, like one of the wisest men that she had ever known, but it was an extraterrestrial being. And then this is some of the language that she would see and communicate with some of the beings. And this is like a paragraph of extraterrestrial writing that she brought through. By the way, all of these hybrids have frequent visits with the types of beings whose genetics they have, and sometimes they're taken on the craft with them. They don't consider them abductions. They consider them very welcomed beings. They love to have contact with these beings. This is a group of beings, like a conglomerate that all form one being, although they're of different types. And this is Vanessa, who lives in Las Vegas, very lovely young woman. She had an artist friend of hers draw from her descriptions the beings whose genetics she has. Many of them look quite human, but they're not human. They're really extraterrestrial, like this one. And this one as well, with an emphasis there on the third eye, the psychic abilities. And this one, who looks more like a horse, a Pegasian, she said they are called. I had not been aware of that type before knowing Vanessa. This was a very wise, kindly type. And she said this is her hybrid son, whom she's very proud of. He lives on the ship, not here, but she's very loving of him and gets to have frequent visits with him. And then this being looks kind of like a camel. In fact, this is called a camelopardian species of extraterrestrial, a very wise being, and this one as well. So she has the genetics of all of these beings, and this one who looks more human. I think there are many species out there on different planets who appear to be very, very much like humans, but they do have abilities in most cases that very few of us have. I know I don't. Robert Fullington, a wonderful young man, and he has experiences primarily with mantis beings, these tall insectoid types, and he loves them. They are wonderful. Jacqueline, the first one I showed you, has a lot of mantis too, and they met one time at a conference without knowing about each other, but they sensed the mantisness in each other. So here they were, two strangers, saw each other in the hallway of this International UFO Congress, came up to each other and just instinctively did what they called the mantis bow, which means they leaned forward, they touched their foreheads with each other's foreheads, and then did this with their hands. Now, in both of those cases, their hands at the wrists fold right over. The rest of us can't do that, but they could. And so they recognized, they sensed the mantisness in each other. So Robert also had experiences with this kind of beings. The one here in the foreground is holding this light, which is used for healing. I regressed him to an experience where his brain, or the top part of his brain, was taken out of his head by these beings and repaired in some way, put back again, and everything was fine. So here is, he did this depiction of his own experience with the three beings working on the brain and putting it back, and they can suture up whatever they have opened up very quickly, very thoroughly, and very well, so the person is not harmed. And then one night he woke up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and there was this little gray being peeking around the corner of the closet wall at him. So he has experiences with them, and then sometimes he sees these balls of light, and they turn out to be beings, and little flecks of light. He submitted these pictures to me, and streaks of light, which turn into beings as well. And Charmaine, lovely young woman from England, I've gotten to know her very well. Spent time with her in crop circles and at a conference. And she had experience with several different types. Some of them are this type of being. This is her own drawing of a reptilian being. She has a considerable amount of reptilian in her, and she said the reptilian whom she knows is very friendly, a really nice guy. And then more of a gray type of being. And this type, they look in some cases to be unhappy, but they're not really unhappy. They just look that way. That's the way their features are. And then Jujulikita, she is holding a snake, as you might see there. She loves anything animal-like, any kind of animal, any kind of reptile. very friendly with snakes. She has reptilian in her, as some of these do. And her roommate at a conference, once Cynthia Crawford, saw Julie in bed at night in her full reptilian form. Some of these beings who have reptilian in them will temporarily shapeshift into the full reptilian form, and then maybe for a couple of hours or so, or a few hours, and then back into their human form. And they like the reptilians enough that they're very happy to do that. So this is, according to Julie, her real name is Carrie Barlow, but the ETs gave her the name Julie Kita. Anyway, this is a reptilian being she has a lot of contact with, whom she says is a magnificent being who actually radiates those colors of light. And then this type of being as well, sort of a gray type, but very benevolent. This is more of the little gray type, but quite decent and nice. And then these beings from a very watery planet. This being has skin that's very much like the dolphins that you see here, and the blue Arcturian type, and reptilian type. And then this type, a gray type, this is actually a crop circle that happened in 2002 in southern England, but she included this picture because it's that type of being that she has in her genetics. And here's Cynthia, whom I've mentioned, and some of the sculptures here in the foreground. And she has a very lighted, glowing being. And there's an extraterrestrial being that looks very much like Sekhmet, the Egyptian goddess, a cat-like being, and the shorter gray type of being. And this one is, she calls this a tall white zeta, not the little gray zeta, but a different species called tall white zeta beings. And here is the book, in case you're interested in that. And that will conclude that. Now we have time for questions finally. Yes.